Well, hello to my family and the few friends that will probably look at this. This is Gary, all right. And this is kind of an experiment, what I'm doing here. This is a first try at making a video. And, I got some time on my hands these days. Since the virus showed up, haven't been going anywhere. So believe it or not, my version of fun lately has been to get on the internet and research things. I really like to do that. Just to sort of be a mental traveler and explore something new that I don't know anything about. And of course, YouTube is a great tool in doing all that. And that's how I got into what I'm going to share with you on this video. I was surfing on YouTube and I ran across these Viking ships. There's several of them. When the Vikings buried somebody important, they buried them in a whole ship, along with lots of other stuff. So that ship, which is on display now in Oslo, is 1,000 years old. And the way they're built just amazed me. I was just so impressed with it. And that got me into looking at some of the videos of people who are building ships today the same way the Vikings did. And the woodworking and the carpentry in them is just so impressive to me. So I got hooked on that, sort of went down the rabbit hole, and just got me thinking basically about the Vikings and about Sweden and Scandinavia, and made me realize that I know absolutely nothing about Sweden or Scandinavia, which in a way, when I thought about it, is a little odd because I am genetically 100% Swedish. I am a Swede, So that's my family on my dad's side. That is Andrew Johnson. And I put the Johnson in quotes because he came to the United States in 1874. And when he got off the steamer at, I assume, Ellis Island, he had a trunk with him, and on the trunk was written the name Johansson. Not Johnson, but Johansson. And then I interviewed some of his children many years later, and they remembered that his name actually was Ifarsson or Ingvarsson. And they're different because it depends on if you're talking to a Swede or a Dane. It's a different pronunciation, different spelling. So my name, Johnson, is kind of a fantasy. From what I understand, that was really a common thing for new immigrants. They didn't want to be identified with where they came from. They wanted to be Americans. So they changed their name, and that's what he did. So that's half my Swedish world, and that's my grandfather right there, Emil Johnson. And then on my mother's side, we have Gustav Adolf Lindquist and his wife, Nevi Paulsen, both Swedish. So I'm all the way Swede, and the fact is, I don't know anything about Sweden, and I don't know anything even more about Scandinavia. So that got me going just on a wild hair, really. So what I did was I got on Wikipedia, and I got the Sweden page, and I just started to read, and when I'd run into something that I didn't know anything about or didn't understand, I would just go research it. And for me, that's quite a bit of fun because I'm an old guy now. God, I remember what it was like to try to research something when I was young. And now you can just click on a link and there it is, and it's just amazes me. So that's what I did. So I started reading about Sweden, and one of the first things I ran into that I didn't know anything about and had actually never even heard of was runes and runestones. So in my reading, I discovered, now this is kind of the father god figure in Norse mythology. That's Odin. And the legend about him is that he gave runes as a gift to humanity. So in terms of the legend, that's where they came from. So what are runes? Well, there are alphabets of runes. They are letters in a set of alphabets which were used to write various Germanic languages before the adoption of the Latin alphabet. And this picture I found is a document called the Codex Runicus, and it's on vellum. And vellum is usually calf skin or goat skin. And this manuscript was written about the year 1300 AD, and it has one of the oldest and best preserved texts of the Scanian law, which I assume is Scandinavian law, and it's written entirely in runes. So that's what a runes document looks like. And there are several alphabets of runes because they changed over time. They used these things probably at least 500 years, like from about 100 AD to maybe 600 or 700 AD. And there's different alphabets. And this particular one, when I was looking it over, I ran across this word, which kind of interested me. The word is aurochs. And I thought to myself, I know what an aurochs is from my time listening to Joseph Campbell talk about the myths of the early hunters and gatherers. And an aurochs, that's what an aurochs is. That is one of the paintings from the Hall of the Bulls at Lascaux Cave in southern France. And that was painted, we think, about 15,000 BC. And in other caves in southern France and northern Spain, there are also paintings, drawings of aurochs. So they were the original wild cattle of Europe. And that just spoke to me about the antiquity of this runic alphabet, that it's got a character in it that stands for an animal that's been extinct for hundreds of years. Somehow that impressed me. So then I just did a little research on aurochs, and I discovered that there are people today who are trying to bring this animal back from extinction. And so they're using genetic engineering to try to create something at least similar to what the original aurochs was. And I was stunned when I looked at some of the pictures of the cattle that they're creating, because I came across this guy and I went, wow. Now, I grew up on a farm and I've seen a lot of cattle, but I've never seen a critter like that. That's just astounding. And I don't know I could not find where that animal is or what the name of it is. But if I do a search on re-engineering the aurochs, that picture always comes up. So I found that to be pretty stunning. So anyway, that was just a little side trip on this business of the runic alphabets. And here was another one, and I think there's 5 or 6 of the different ones. And so all over Scandinavia, there are these things. They are called rune stones. And they're basically monuments, just the way we use monuments to commemorate something. And much to my amazement, scholars can read those things. So I got the impression that when these things were first being studied, the perception was that they were just used on monuments. But then I've discovered this thing, that in the 1950s, they found this large collection of inscriptions called, I guess, the Briggen inscriptions, found in Bergen, Norway. And they were inscriptions made on wood and bone, often in the shape of sticks or various sizes, and contained inscription of an everyday nature, ranging from name tags to prayers to personal messages and to business letters. And you look at the pictures here, the one side is a wooden cross, and it's got runes scratched in it. And that other picture is a piece of a shoe that has runes like tooled into the leather. That is an amazing artifact because, like I said, they stopped writing with these things maybe in 600 AD. And so that's amazing that that artifact survived. So then also in the collection, they found inscriptions that were sometimes bawdy phrases of a profane and sometimes even vulgar nature. So following this find, it's now commonly presumed that at least in its late use, runic was a widespread common writing system. And so there is just another rune stone. I have no idea what it says, but scholars do. Then I thought this was interesting. This is the Vinrose comb from Funen, Denmark. Features the earliest known runic inscription, AD 150 to 200, and it simply reads Harja, a male name. You can see the runes scratched in the wood, and I thought that was quite remarkable, and that lent me to do a little research on this business of Viking combs, and I found out that Vikings were very meticulous about their appearance. And in these graves that they excavate, they find many combs and things to trim your beard and pins to put in your hair so you can do arrangements of your hair. And so these combs would have been not just some sideline out of that. They would have been very important to the people who were using them. And oh yeah, this was this slide. Very important to the Vikings. Scientists have found combs, razors, nail cleaners, ear cleaners, and toothpicks inside Viking tombs. All these Viking artifacts show that people in the Viking age took great care when it came to personal grooming. Now then, this was funny, I thought. I found this little quote In his chronicle from the year 1220, a guy named John Wallingford described the Vikings as well-groomed heartbreakers. And this is the quote from what he wrote about the Vikings. They had also conquered, or planned to conquer, all the country's best cities and caused many hardships for the country's original citizens. For they were, according to their country's customs, in the habit of combing their hair every day, to bathe every Saturday, to change their clothes frequently, and to draw attention to themselves by means of many such frivolous whims. In this way they sieged the married women's virtue and persuaded the daughters of even noble men to become their mistresses. So they were the well-groomed heartbreakers. I thought that was very humorous. So, runes. So they were writing with runes, and they lasted several hundred years, and eventually they were replaced, generally, by the Latin alphabet as the cultures that had used runes underwent Christianization. And that happened about 700 AD in Central Europe and 1100 AD in Northern Europe. And then this fellow, I'm not going to try that name, he's considered to be the transition from the Viking Age to the Middle Ages because he was the first Christian king of the Swedes, who were the last to adopt Christianity in Scandinavia. And of course, that's the reason that I grew up as a little Lutheran boy, because eventually the Swedes adopted Christianity after the Reformation, and Lutheranism was the style of the day. So the name rune itself is taken to mean something secret or hidden, and it seems to indicate that knowledge of the runes was originally considered esoteric or restricted to an elite. A recent study of runic magic, now see, that's something I never heard of before. Runic magic suggests that runes were used to create magical objects, such as amulets, but not in a way that would indicate that runic writing was any more inherently magical than were other writing systems. So somehow this rune thing got associated with magic. And this bracelet, you can see it's from 400 AD, and it has the charm word Elu, and you can see the little rune up there in the upper left-hand part of the circle, and it's got a stylized male head and a horse and a swastika, a common motif on bracelets. And it's interesting that the swastika is on that amulet because the use of runes in Germanic mysticism played a certain role in Nazi symbolism. This was mostly limited to Heinrich Himmler and not shared by other members of the Nazi top echelon. Consequently, runes appear mostly in insignia associated with the Schutzstaffel? Yeah, not too good. The paramilitary organization led by Himmler. And that was the insignia, and those are runes. So then I, did a little research on runic magic, and I discovered runes are popular in various forms of neo-paganism and New Age esotericism. Various systems of runic divination have been published since the 1980s. And I got the impression that there's kind of a little cottage industry of producing merchandise that has to do with runes and some kind of magical power. So you can get a rune healing set. You can get a set of the rune alphabet. You can get t-shirts that have runes on them. You can get a rune ring. You can get a Viking rune that's got Thor's hammer on it. And you can get a rune stone set. Now, Nona told me that when she was in Santa Fe with her sisters on a trip, there was a woman there who was offering to give psychic readings using rune stones. And what she did was take all these stones and kind of throw them out on a table, and the stones that had the rune symbol up were significant, and the ones where the rune symbol was down were eliminated. And then this woman is purported to be able to interpret something mystical about the runes that show up. So there's kind of a craft associated with magic and rune stones. So the last little thing that I discovered was this humorous item. The Bluetooth logo is the combination of two runes of the Younger Futhark alphabet that are equivalent to the letters H and B. And those letters, H and B, are the initials of Harold Bluetooth, that was his nickname, was Bluetooth, Harold Blateland, who was the King of Denmark until 986. So that's why we have that symbol on our Bluetooth devices. They are runes that go way back into our early history. So that is my first little adventure of just researching something that I didn't know anything about. It's got a little something to do with Sweden, with my heritage. And if you stayed with me and watched this entire thing, you should get some kind of reward for that, I would think. But anyway, thank you for making the trip with me. I will say goodbye.